All right, hi there. I wanted to make one more video about the plan of analysis section to give you kind of a little bit better of an idea of what you're going to be doing there as well. And again, I will direct you to the samples that are included in the course space in the Start Here section, because while some of those examples are from a class similar to this one and have less detail to give you an idea of kind of how much detail you need to provide, the ones that are dissertations and grant proposals really show you a great example of how to format the plan of analysis section, how to discuss your preliminary analyses, and how to sort of format the question, the hypothesis, how you'll test, that kind of thing, if you're doing a quantitative proposal. And then if you're doing a qualitative proposal, there's also a really good example of a dissertation proposal that was qualitative that shows you how she sort of projected the coding that she would do, how she would clean up her data first, those kinds of things. So please make use of those examples that are in the Start Here section. And you can obviously see some that are obviously more detailed and some that are less detailed, but each have value in giving you sort of a perception of what to include and what this assignment might end up looking like when you're finished. Okay? So after you've written the lit review and you've identified a question, a gap that still exists in the literature, then you wrote your methods section where you talked about how you would answer that question, your sample, how you'd recruit them, what they'd have to do, your procedures for your research. You wrote me that recipe of how this research would be conducted, how the data would be collected, all those things, right? The variables, if it's quantitative, were operationalized for me. Now you're on the home stretch, really. And surprisingly, this section is not that hard to write. It really won't be a very long section, especially if you only have one or two research questions, which is what I think you should stick with. And so while it may seem to be the one that you are the least familiar with how to do, it's going to be one that's probably one of the easier sections to write. So in the plan of analysis, if it's a quantitative study that you're proposing, you are going to talk about each hypothesis specifically. You're going to discuss how you will analyze the data to test that hypothesis. You'll give the specific statistics, say that 3 times fast, the specific statistics that you will run. You will tell me what variables will be included in those analyses. And hint, the names of the variables that you use in the plan of analysis should be the names of the variables that you operationalized for me in the method section so that I know what you're talking about when I get there. If you're doing qualitative, you're going to be talking to me about how you're going to code your data, how you will identify themes or concepts or whatever it is that the goal is of the tradition that you've chosen. And while there's a lot more flexibility in a qualitative dissertation, you're like, no, we're not doing a dissertation. While there's much more flexibility in a qualitative study, you still have to have a plan to begin with, especially if you're persuading me that this is a topic that's good to do, that you know how to run these analyses. If you were writing a grant proposal, for example, sort of mirroring on that example we used before, you'd have to really be able to demonstrate to the person who's going to decide who gets the funding if you know how to do what it is you're going to do, if you have a good enough plan. So it has to be really detailed. You'll start your section off, though, with your preliminary analyses. This is where you give information about if it's quantitative, about the distribution. So is it a normal distribution? If so, you tell us. If not, are there transformations that need to be computed? You don't have to know what those would be. You just have to say that you have to be aware that if it's skewed or there's kurtosis or any number of things, that you have a plan for what you would do to get that normally distributed so that you could then run these parametric statistics that I hope that you've chosen to do. If you're doing qualitative, still you'll provide information about your sample. So how many people did you have? What were sort of the percentages of their maybe characteristics that were important to your study. You do the same thing in quant. You might give some sample descriptives. Oftentimes that ends up in an actual published article being in the sample section. But for us, you might say when you talk about your analysis, I will first run descriptives. I will provide descriptive information about the demographic variables. You're telling me everything that you're going to do when you get that data into your hand and into the computer. So you start with your preliminary analyses and what you'll do for that, and then you go into your primary analyses, which is where you would talk about how you're going to answer the research question that you posed. You're also going to conclude this section with both a prediction of some possible limitations that you might face. Although at the proposal stage, you want to be really careful with those, because if you list too many limitations, the reader's going to say, well, you haven't done it yet. It's a proposal. Why don't you address those in your plan? So that those won't be limitations. So you have to be really careful when you're doing that. There will be some things that you might recognize as, look, this is going to be a limitation. I'm only collecting data from this particular geographic location, and that will be a limitation. You know, and that's how the study is going to go, and that's a limitation, and you're admitting it up front. You also, though, want to talk about some strengths. What will these results add to the literature? What will they tell us? How will they address that gap that you've identified? And you also want to talk about some implications for the work, for both practitioners who might be out working in the field, working with the population that you're interested in studying and needing the answer to this question that you've posed so they can be more effective in their work. And also, what are the implications for future research? What will your results provide that will let us know what future researchers should do, if you can go that far? So this plan of analysis section will sort of have four kind of main sections. The preliminary analyses, which is what you'll do with your data to sort of clean it up, to make it a manageable data set that you can actually work off of. Then your primary analyses, how are you going to answer, what analyses will you run to answer your question? Or what analyses will you undertake, if it's qualitative, to answer the research question? And then you'll have sort of your strengths and limitations section and an implication section. And that's the plan of analysis. And then it is just onto your introduction. So, which is the last thing, which should be pretty easy to write, because you know what the literature said, you know what your research plan is, you know how you're going to analyze the data, and so you know what kind of results you might hope to expect. Now, to be clear, this is an assignment that is a proposal, so there will be no actual data collected. You will not actually go out and complete this study. So there's no results. So your plan of analysis is simply, this is how I will analyze these data. And so look at those samples to get a sense for how that is communicated. Don't make up results. I have had people in the past who, for some reason, think that this plan of analysis needs to have data, and so they make up findings and they write it in there. And that is a big, huge no-no. Don't ever make up findings. Don't ever do that. Also, don't conduct research without IRB approval. We have neither of those things. So this is just a proposal. This is how I would analyze the data that I get. These are the tests I would run, and these are the variables I would use in those tests. That's it. Okay? What kind of result would indicate a support for your hypothesis? And you can see some of those examples. They talk about, for example, a MANOVA will be run with blank as the independent variables and blank as the dependent variables. Significant group differences at the 0.05 level will provide evidence for differences in the groups on these variables. Period. I basically just wrote the plan of analysis for that hypothesis. I mean, that's how simple it is. It really is not complicated. But there shouldn't be any actual data that is being reported. So I just want to make that super, super clear. No actual data. So you're not really conducting this research. You're just writing a plan, a proposal for how this research could be conducted if you were given permission, approval, funding, whatever, to go out and conduct this research. So I hope that helps you a little bit with your plan of analysis. Again, go use those samples and examples that are there in the Start Here section so that you can really get a sense of what it might look like on paper. This is not a really super long section, and people are often sort of surprised at the simplicity with which you state how you'll analyze your data, and they think that's wrong, so they kind of make it more complicated. It really is very simple. So look at those examples and those samples to get an idea so that you can feel confident that, yeah, it really is this simple. This really is that simple. Okay? So as always, questions about this, email them to me, put them on the Q&A board. Ask each other if you need to, but always, come to me if you between the however many of you can't figure out the answer. I'm happy to help. So keep plugging along. You're on the home stretch. I can't believe the summer's already almost over. It feels like it just started. And you've been working super hard, and so good for you. Keep up the good work.